Most people learn the wrong way, even without realizing it. They start at the end. They observe someone experienced doing something impressive, see the final result, and try to copy it immediately. They want to sound like an experienced musician, think like an advanced programmer, or act with the confidence of a master, without understanding the path that led them there. They skip steps, look for shortcuts, mix styles, before mastering the basics, and after some time, they become frustrated because progress seems slow, confusing, or non-existent. The problem isn't a lack of talent, it's the wrong order of learning. Before we begin, if you seek to develop real discipline, mental clarity, and self-mastery, consider enrolling in Program Name Course Name, Samurai Ascend. This channel is dedicated to ancient principles that strengthen the mind and shape character, not to impress, but to transform. Now, follow along. For centuries, Japanese masters, from samurai warriors to calligraphers, artisans, monks, and tea ceremony practitioners, perceived something fundamental about how human beings truly learn. They understood that mastery doesn't arise from precocious creativity, but from the correct discipline applied in the right sequence. From this observation, a simple yet profound system emerged that transformed ordinary students into true masters. This system is called Shuhari. Shuhari is not an isolated technique nor a secret trick. It is a learning framework that respects the nature of the human mind. It describes the complete path from ignorance to mastery, without skipping steps, without illusions, and without haste. It works for learning anything: playing an instrument, writing better, programming, public speaking, studying mathematics, or developing self-control. And it works precisely because it goes against the modern impulse to want immediate results. The term Shuhari is formed from 3 Japanese words. Shu means to protect, follow, or obey. Ha means to break free, detach oneself. Ri means to separate completely and create one's own path. These 3 stages represent distinct phases of human learning, and each requires a different mental attitude. The mistake most people make is trying to live in the 3rd phase before even completing the 1st. In the Shu stage, the student learns to follow the traditional method exactly as it was taught. There is no room for improvisation. There is no creative freedom. There is no personal style. All of that is temporarily set aside. The focus is on copying with absolute precision. The body learns before the mind. The brain absorbs correct patterns through repetition. This stage may seem limiting to those accustomed to valuing originality above all else, but it fulfills an essential function: building the foundation. When a student began their training under a swordmaster in ancient Japan, they were not encouraged to invent movements or experiment with variations. They repeated the same stances, the same cuts, the same movements for months or years. The position of the feet, the angle of the blade, the rhythm of the breath. Everything had to be executed exactly as demonstrated. Not because the master wanted to control the student, but because they knew the body needed to learn the correct way before any variation was possible. This principle is repeated in all traditional Japanese arts. In calligraphy, the student spends long periods simply copying strokes. He doesn't create new letters, doesn't seek his own style, doesn't try to stand out. He observes, imitates, and repeats. At first glance, this seems to produce identical students, but the effect is the opposite. By deeply internalizing the correct form, the student develops an invisible understanding of proportions, pressure, rhythm, and balance, something that cannot be explained with words alone. Shu is the stage where one learns the right way, not because it's the only possible way, but because it's the proven way. It's the path that has already worked for previous generations. At this point, creativity is not a virtue. It's a distraction. The mind still doesn't know how to distinguish between innovation and error. Therefore, the Japanese system demands humility at this stage. The student needs to accept that they don't yet know enough to modify the method. Modern education often ignores this stage. It encourages students to find their own voice too early. It promotes personal expression before the foundations are consolidated. The result is learners with premature confidence but fragile skills. They develop bad habits that become difficult to correct later. They create unstable mental structures that limit future growth. Shuhari avoids this problem by making Shu non-negotiable. There is a biological reason for this. The brain learns complex skills by building specific neural connections. These connections need precise repetition to strengthen. When the student improvises too early, they create confusing pathways. The body learns inaccurate versions of the movement. The mind registers incorrect patterns. Then, even with effort, it becomes difficult to correct. Shu respects this natural process. He slows down the beginning to accelerate mastery in the long term. Only after the student has completely mastered the traditional method does the Ha stage become possible. Ha is the moment of breaking with the rigid form. But this break is not rebellion. It is conscious adaptation. The Ha student now deeply understands the rules and can begin to test them. He experiments with small variations, observes what works best for his body, his mind, his personality. It is here that individuality begins to emerge, not as a whim, but as a result of understanding. In ancient times, when a samurai completed his formal apprenticeship with a master, he was often sent to train with other teachers or placed in new and unpredictable situations. This forced the practitioner to adapt what he had learned. The perfect forms of the dojo needed to work in the real world. In this process, some techniques proved more effective than others for that specific individual. The student began to discover his own relationship with the art. This is an uncomfortable stage. There are no more ready-made answers. The student ceases to be merely a copier and becomes an experimenter. Mistakes happen. Failures arise. The security of the single path disappears. Many stop here. Some because they are afraid of making mistakes. Others because they cling too much to the authority of the teacher. They remain technically competent but never develop true autonomy. Modern culture makes the opposite mistake. It pushes people toward Ha before Shu. It encourages experimentation without a foundation. It calls confusion creativity. The result is an appearance of innovation without depth. Shuhari protects the student from this mistake by imposing a clear order. First learn, then experiment. The third stage, Ri, arises naturally for those who persevere. Ri cannot be forced. It is not a direct goal. It is a consequence. At this stage, the practitioner no longer thinks about rules, techniques, or methods. The knowledge has been fully internalized. Action flows without conscious effort. What was once learned is now natural expression. Miyamoto Musashi perfectly represents this stage. After decades following traditional schools, and then experimenting with different approaches, he developed his own style, Niten Ichi Ryu, which utilized 2 swords. This innovation did not arise from an attempt to be different, but from a deep understanding of real combat. When he wrote the Book of 5 Rings, Musashi was no longer teaching specific techniques. He was conveying universal principles that transcended any school. Ri is rare because it demands time, patience, and commitment to the previous stages. Most people never reach it not because of a lack of ability, but because of impatience. They want to appear masters before becoming students. Shuhari reveals that mastery is not a leap, but a journey. When someone finally reaches the Ri stage, something curious happens. The person stops worrying about rules, methods, or structures, not because they despise them, but because they are no longer necessary. Everything that previously required conscious effort now happens naturally. The body knows what to do. The mind responds without hesitation. Action comes at the right moment, without excessive calculation. This is the true sign of mastery. It is not visible perfection, but absolute naturalness. At this point, the practitioner no longer sees himself as someone who is learning. Learning has become part of who he is. His decisions are not based on formulas, but on perception. He doesn't react, he recognizes. He doesn't execute techniques, he expresses understanding. This is why true masters seem simple. There is no exaggeration, no apparent effort, no need to prove anything. Everything is economical, precise, and silent. Most people never reach this stage because they confuse freedom with a lack of discipline. They believe that creating their own path means rejecting any previous form. Shuhari shows exactly the opposite. True freedom only emerges after a long coexistence with limits. Only those who have spent years respecting a structure can transcend that structure without getting lost. Ri is not rebellion. It is integration. When Musashi developed his 2-sword style, he wasn't trying to be innovative. He was responding to the reality of combat in the most honest way possible. His body no longer needed to think about traditional techniques. They were already incorporated. The new form emerged because it made sense, not because he sought originality. This differentiates masters from imitators. The master creates because he needs to. The imitator creates because he wants to appear different. This same principle applies to any modern skill. A programmer who reaches the Ri level no longer thinks about syntax or basic patterns. He sees invisible structures. He solves problems intuitively. A writer at this stage doesn't worry about grammatical rules or narrative techniques. They've already absorbed them. The text flows. A musician no longer thinks about scales or chords. He simply plays, and the sound carries intention and clarity. It's important to understand that Ri is not a fixed destination. It's not a title one earns and keeps forever. It's a state that arises when the right conditions have been built up over time. If practice ceases, clarity diminishes. If discipline is lost, mastery weakens. Shuhari doesn't promise shortcuts. It offers alignment with the reality of human learning. Applying Shuhari to modern life requires honesty with oneself. The first step is recognizing what stage you are actually at, not where you would like to be, but where you are. Many believe they are in Ha or Ri when they have not yet completed Shu. This generates silent frustration. The person feels they are trying very hard, but not progressing. The problem is not a lack of trying. It's a lack of foundation. When starting any new learning process, the path is simple, but it requires humility. Choose someone who has already mastered what you want to learn. Not someone popular, but someone competent. Observe how this person does the basics, not just what they say, but how they execute. Then commit to copying that method exactly for an extended period, not days, months, sometimes years. During this time, resist the urge to improve the method or make it more interesting. Your role is not to innovate, it is to absorb. This period may seem slow, especially in a culture that glorifies speed, but something silent happens as you repeat. Your body begins to anticipate movements. Your mind begins to recognize patterns. The effort decreases. Understanding deepens without you even realizing it. That's Shu at work. It doesn't impress in the short term, but it builds something solid. When execution becomes stable and consistent, Ha emerges almost as a necessity. You begin to notice small possible variations, subtle adjustments, alternative paths that respect the essence of the method but adapt better to you. This is the time to experiment carefully, not to break everything but to test limits. Some attempts will fail, others will work better than the original. This process should not be rushed. Ha requires observation, reflection, and recording. This is where many give up because the comfort of the clear path disappears. By persisting in Ha, something interesting happens. Choices become more intuitive. You no longer test everything. You select better. You discard what doesn't work more quickly. Gradually, the practice ceases to be a conscious exercise and becomes an extension of your way of thinking. When this happens, Rai begins to emerge unannounced. There is no clear moment of transition. One day, you realize that you simply know. At this stage, learning ceases to be effort and becomes expression. You no longer compare yourself to others. You don't seek external validation. The focus shifts from results to internal clarity. Paradoxically, this is when the results become most visible. People observe and say you have natural talent. They don't see the years of silent repetition. They don't see the failed attempts. They don't see the patience needed to avoid skipping steps. The power of Shuhari lies precisely in this brutal honesty with the process. It removes the anxiety of doing it wrong because it makes clear what each phase requires. In Shu, copy. In Ha, experiment. In Ri, trust. Nothing more, nothing less. When you accept this, learning ceases to be confusing. You stop wasting energy questioning the method and start investing energy in practice. Modern science confirms what Japanese masters discovered through observation. The brain learns best when correct patterns are repeated before being modified. First, repetition builds stable neural pathways. Then, variation strengthens these pathways. Finally, integration makes the skill automatic. Shuhari is not empty tradition. It is an accurate description of how human learning works. In a world obsessed with shortcuts, Shuhari offers something more valuable: direction. He doesn't promise illusory speed, but real progress. He doesn't sell magic formulas, but clarity. Following this path requires patience, but rewards with something rare: genuine mastery. And once you understand this system, it becomes applicable to any area of your life. Learning ceases to be a confusing struggle and becomes a streamlined process. You know when to obey, when to question, and when to simply act. This is the true legacy of the Japanese masters. Not a specific technique, but a way of walking. Silent, profound, inevitable for those who persevere.